our emotions have evolved functions. If it was only negative and did not serve a function, why would evolution keep it? Why would it have evolved all this time and not have been wiped out? It serves some kind of function.
Abbie, so thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I wondered if we could start by introducing you a bit to some of our listeners who may not have heard of you or read any of your books. So I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, and a bit about your personal journey, how you got into becoming a behavioural scientist.
Yep, so I'm Dr. Abbie Maroño. As you said, I'm a behavioral scientist, a professor of psychology, and the director of education at Social Engineer. What I do for my day job is a little bit different than what I do with some of my side projects and my books. I have various different fields. My PhD was specialized in information elicitation and nonverbal communication. And for my day job, I work for an information security company and I create courses and educational material. And part of what I do connected to that is provide specialized behavioral analysis training. Like I was just in Seattle training the Secret Service, FBI, and Homeland Security in information elicitation and nonverbals and deception detection. So all of that stuff stays within the realm of forensics. So when I released a book in self-help, shame, and empowerment, people were very confused because it's something I have done for many years, kind of in the background. And I came from dark psych. So if you look at my research background, my research is in serial killers, cannibalism, lots of really dark things. And when I would submit an ethics application, the whole team would kind of sweat, like, what is she going to put in now? What do we have to argue? So it was very strange, and I moved into the positive psych. But it was because of my own personal journey. It was something I had been teaching myself and working on for many, many years. And I had gone through some pretty dark periods of my life and some pretty severe traumas. And I had gone through the self-help books to try and get myself out of those places and understand why I was behaving the way that I was and feeling the way that I was. But although the self-help books are very well-meaning, they weren't scientifically based. They weren't based in how human beings actually work. So they were very, take me as I am, you learn to be bulletproof, and all of these concepts that sound great and sound what we expect empowerment to look like because we see it on TV. We see people, sat by beds of roses and talking about, I'm healing, and it's this wonderful thing. So you expect it to be that way, but it just doesn't align with how human beings actually work. So I decided that I needed to think of myself as a data point and jump into the clinical literature and try and figure out, okay, well, what does someone that's behaving this way, what are they suffering with? What could their behavior be a consequence of? What could these emotions be doing? What could they be signaling? And through the literature, I got myself out of some really dark places, and it came with my understanding of human emotions, the brain, human behavior. And I got myself to a point where I was happier than I could ever imagine being, in a better place than I could ever imagine being. So I felt almost this need to put that book out. And I had always been very stoic and very tough love. That's just how I've been brought up. So I didn't like to release the positive psych stuff because I'm like, no, the dark psych stuff, it goes with my personality. We have the tough love. But when I was a professor, I saw so many of my students struggling. And I realized that I'm not someone they could come to because I'm not someone that they felt comfortable with. Because I kept getting the feedback of, well, you intimidate them because you don't look approachable, because you don't want to ask someone for help if they've got this stern look on their face. So I realized something really had to change. And I was trying to present Dr. Abbie as this hard, stern, cold professional because that's how I thought I could get where I want to be. But that isn't who I am. It's who I've never been who I am. It was an image I was presenting. So I decided, well, if I'm going to teach people to be authentic, to heal, to grow, then I have to just strip away who I think I should be and just be who I am. And that's where the book came from.
Wow. So it's a lot to unpick there. I mean,
yeah,
I can say obviously allowing yourself to be vulnerable at the moment is very empowering, but also quite daunting, I should imagine.
Yeah, I've always been someone that's very closed off. I grew up in a pretty unstable household, and I had a very abusive mother and a dad that was loving and caring, but going through his own mental health struggles. So he wasn't able to be present in the way that I needed him to be. So I really learned to look after myself. And at 16, I got myself out of a pretty serious drug addiction with no family support. So from that point onwards, I really learned that it's just me against the world to take care of myself. So I closed myself off from the world. And one relationship I had later gotten into turned out to be extremely abusive. And then from that point, I was like, okay, well, family, friends, lovers, all of them, they want to hurt me. So I just have to keep to myself. So I really learned to be that way. And I had this hyper independence and I made a lot of mistakes that even now when I don't feel shame, I still feel embarrassed because they don't represent who I am. And when we talk about healing through shame, we can't undo the past. So even when we heal and we grow, we still have to face the fact we did those things. And in my book, I tell people to be honest and truthful and authentic and own up to the consequences of your actions because if you don't face them, you can't move forward. So I learned to be vulnerable. And when I was writing the book, there were things in there that I really didn't want to put in because, like I said, they still embarrass me that I did them. And it still makes my skin crawl when I think of people knowing those things about me. But how could I move forward and tell other people to do it if I don't do it? So I realized it's all or nothing. I can't go halfway and be hiding behind the scenes because then why should anybody listen to me? So I put it in there, and now when people say, "I've read your book," I'm like, "Please don't talk to me about whatever's in there. Just take the learnings, implement it into your own life, and just pretend you don't know those things about me."
God, it's so brave. It really is sort of like putting yourself out there just in any way. And sure there are so many people that can relate, people listening, maybe people that haven't necessarily gone through huge traumas, but I think we all in some way have suffered from shame. So maybe let's talk a little bit about what shame actually is. And I think most people probably have an idea of what shame is in some way, shape or form, but from a behavioral scientist perspective, what actually is shame?
Well, shame is quite difficult to define for everybody because there are multiple types of shame. But when we think of shame, we think about feeling flawed. When I feel shame, I feel that I am in some way flawed. I am broken, and it leads us to think, well, I am unworthy and I'm unlovable. And that's what we typically think of as shame. It's a self of or a sense of self failing. Now, there's two versions of shame. There's healthy shame and there's toxic shame. And most of us just think of shame as a negative thing. And I've coached therapists and explained to them the evolutionary psychiatry of emotions. And you see, and they go, that actually makes a lot of sense. And I practice shame as a bad thing because we're told make it go away. And actually, what happens is all of our emotions are signals. Emotions have evolved to tell us something. They have evolved to motivate behavior based on something happening in the environment. So, what shame does is shame says, okay, how you are behaving is not in line with who you want to be, who you perceive yourself to be, or who you are. And think about how motivated we are by group behaviors. So, if you want to be part of a social group and you behave in a way that is not consistent with that social group, they can shame you or you feel shame for it because, I'm not in line with how I should be with this group. I no longer belong. Now, the reason that there is toxic and healthy shame is because shame is naturally that signal and it needs to be there because it motivates change. So, research has shown that individuals who do behave in a way and then they feel shame, say, I've done something to contradict the actions of the social group. If I feel shame, I'm more likely to behave in a pro social way to make up for it than if I don't. I'm also more likely to be motivated to change my behavior. That's what shame is doing. It says, hey, something needs to change. But the reason that it's healthy versus toxic is if we say, I behaved in this way, so we have behavior here, and then we go, so this means that I have failed. We move the target of failure from behavior to self. I did a bad thing, so I am bad. Healthy shame is I did a bad thing, so the behavior is bad, not the self. So we confuse the target of shame. And that's why we get this deep sense of failing, not I failed, but I am a failure. And that becomes really toxic because if I've done these awful things and I go, okay, well, self is bad, why would I change? Because if I'm bad at the core, don't I deserve these bad consequences? If I'm bad at the core, why don't I just keep going on in this negative cycle because I deserve that? Okay, my friends are leaving me. I won't try and mend the bridges because I'm bad, so I deserve that. And this can happen really early in life if you do a bad thing and your parents go, you're a bad kid. You move that behavior to self. What we need to try and learn to do is move the target of shame from behavior to self. And the reason that that's a really hard thing to do is because when we behave badly, and not just feeling guilt, so guilt and shame are different. So if I can say I break up with a partner and I feel guilty, but it was in my best interest, I don't feel shame. Say I cheated, I might feel shame because now that goes against who I feel myself to be. So it's a very distinct emotion. And usually behind shame is quite traumatic triggers. So usually when we behave in a way that is not in line with who we want to be or who we think we are, it can be things because of low self-esteem, low confidence, traumas, because we are self-sabotaging. And then why are we self-sabotaging? All of these things, they're really difficult to unpick. So it's much easier to go, no, no, I am bad and stay in that negative cycle.
God, yeah, it's so interesting. I've never heard it explained like that, and it all makes so much sense because
Yeah.
we all know that person who does something bad and kind of acts like they don't care. It's almost like, well, and I never saw that as sort of like a self-sabotaging
Yeah.
response that stems from shame. I've always seen it as like, oh, well, they're just a bad person then because they clearly don't care. Whereas the person that kind of forgives themselves and then tries to make amends and is trying to be a good person, I always have seen that as like, oh, they have no shame. They're just trying to do better. So it's so interesting.
Yeah. But when we think about how we talk about people that behave in an antisocial way, of course, shame is somewhat positive because we go, don't they have any shame? Do they have no shame? So there's something behind that that we do recognize a little bit that shame might be necessary. And again, our emotions have evolved functions. If it was only negative and did not serve a function, why would evolution keep it? Why would it have evolved all this time and not have been wiped out? It serves some kind of function. And if you look at people who have made these huge changes in their life, like if you go to a rehabilitation center and you ask people who have made it through their journey and you speak to them and you say, what role did shame serve? And usually they'll say, well, it made me feel so awful about myself. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. I had to change. Or you get the opposite. They feel so bad about themselves that they stay in that cycle. And that's because what is driving the shame is so hard to face, they choose not to. So the shame is saying, hey, please look behind me. And if you do, that's where it becomes empowering. Because when I talk about empowerment and then I say shame, the title of my book is The Road to Empowerment, The Journey Through Shame. And people are like, how can you put shame and empowerment in the same sentence? Because shame is the antithesis of empowerment. And that just isn't true. Shame is the only way to get to empowerment because you have to look at why you're doing the things that you're doing in order to change and grow. Because if I want to be this person, but I'm behaving in a way that isn't allowing me to be, I need to look behind my behavior to figure out why in order to make a change. And if I'm not willing to do that, I can't be empowered. I can be self delusional and I can be self deceiving.
Yeah, that is so true. So obviously you use the example of relationships, you know, if you cheated on someone.
Yeah.
What sort of things do you see in terms of people's careers and personal lives where shame crops up, where perhaps people don't even realize it is
Yeah.
shame?
So this was actually one of my core motivations for the book because I have always been a very ambitious person and I have so many things that I want to do with my life. And I started to work towards being able to achieve those things. And then I met Joe Navarro, and he was bringing me into the more industry side of things and doing more media. But because I had behaved in a way that no longer aligned with this person I was becoming, I was so ashamed and terrified that someone would find out. And that's also where it's linked to imposter syndrome, because I was worried that I would go into the classroom or I'd do a podcast or a talk and people would realize that I don't deserve to be there. And I felt so much shame that they would see the things I had done or heard or hear about the things I had done. And what I then did was I self-sabotaged. I was trying to squash opportunities I had deserved and worked so hard to get. But because I knew that with that success would come a little bit more notice. And what if people found out? And I was encouraged to make a personal website. And it got to the point I would check when I'd see someone go on my website. I felt so anxious with every person that hopped on that I kept deleting my website and putting it back up and deleting it. And even when I would do one podcast, it would affect me for weeks of I couldn't sleep properly because I was so afraid that someone would find out that I had a past that wasn't conducive to this successful person I wanted to be, and my whole world would come crumbling down. And I couldn't keep living that way. I got to the point where I just said enough is enough. Either I can keep feeling this shame and keep hiding it, or I can just out myself and just move forward and just own it and face the consequences. And we often do this with our career, maybe not in the same ways, but we either fear failure and we think, I'm not good enough to get this. And that's where the shame comes in. We don't go for opportunities that we perfectly qualified to do. And if we pushed ourselves, we could because we feel like I'm failing as a person. Maybe you're having trouble in your relationship back home and it's making you feel self-conscious, making you feel less than. Those feelings can carry over into your work. So I can't do this project because I'm a failure, because I'm not good enough, because I don't deserve it. And often the shame can come too as we fear success. It's not just failure, we fear if I do this thing, if I take this opportunity and I succeed, there's going to be things that come with that success, increased expectations, maybe more media. And these things scare us to the point that we then try to self-sabotage.
Yeah, so true. That the just touching on the fear of success, it sounds so kind of counterintuitive, but I definitely have experienced that myself. I don't know if you have, Charles, but it's that sudden feeling, you know, you wish and you hope for something for so long, and then when it gets to the sort of precipice where you're near to achieving it, you suddenly are like, oh my god. I've done it with like interviews or like media stuff. If I've been putting on an exhibition and my publicist has got me an interview and I've just been like, I don't want to do it, because then you know that like more people are going to see you, more eyes on you, more there's even more risk of kind of being shamed, really, because like you say, people are going to find out about you. They might Google you and find stuff out, and it's terrifying. Like even if you don't have any big secrets, it's like that fear of going through the airport security and you're suddenly like, oh my god, what if I forgot that I'm a drug dealer? You're like, what if they found something? And you know that that's not true, but you know you still have that fear. So it's so true.
Yep, I've heard people who are going for, say, big speeches and big events, and they say that they think that they can achieve it, but what they're scared of is who they might become with that success. So if you're not really rooted in yourself and have a really stable self-concept, which is our perception of who we are and our traits and our general character, if you don't feel stable in who you are, and you get all this success, there is a fear of, will this change me? Will this also change how other people interact with me? Because with that success does come the social changes. I remember I was bullied really badly back home in Yateley by most of my year. And once I started being on TV, those same people would reach out and, "Oh, it's so good to see you. Do you remember how close we used to be?" And there's that social change of once you start to achieve things, people see you differently and they want something from you. So a lot of people are afraid of that success because of the social pressure it can bring and the change in relationship dynamics.
Oh God, I've had that same thing. It's like when you go back home for Christmas, you go to the pub,
Yeah.
and the people that you went to school with are still at the pub where you grew up, and they're like, "Ah, it's so great to see you." You're like, "You were horrible to me at school.
Yeah.
Like, why are you talking to me now?" It's
Yeah,
so true.
I remember going back to my sixth form, and I was actually kicked out of sixth form when I was 16.
Me too.
Yeah, so A1, and then I was allowed to do A2, but I had to do both these in one because they didn't want me to stay an extra year. And the head of sixth form at the time had told me to be realistic when I said I wanted to go to university, and had sent an email around about me saying that I was a problem student, and had named me in emails and had said basically that I wouldn't make it and I wouldn't get to university. And a few years later, I think 5 years later, I was a professor. It wasn't even maybe 6 years later. Yeah, 6 years later, I was a professor, and I came back, and he'd said, "I knew you'd always make it. I knew you could do this. I always believed in you." And
I've
it's
got the receipts actually.
yeah, yeah, and you think, "Okay, that's fine." But there is that pressure, and there's a change in relationships with success, and it doesn't always have to be dramatic, but it can be that people expect more of you because now you've gone to this thing that requires you to be a certain level of expertise, and you fight and fight and fight and get it, and then you go, "Now I have to do this thing. Now I have to do the job that I've been desperate to get," and there's expectations that come with that.
Yeah. So we've obviously spoken about the fear of failure, which is kind of like the most obvious one, right? And the fear of success, which is maybe not so obvious. Are there any other reasons that people kind of self-sabotage and have that fear of being shamed in some way?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons why people self-sabotage, but it typically comes down to not feeling good enough. And I think this is a real societal issue, and social media has such a huge part to play in this. And this is why shame is so common. Because think about it, if you are trying to be this person, say this is who you want to be, shame can occur if we're behaving in a way that isn't conducive to that. This person I want to be, I perceive myself to be, or who I am. We're covered with expectations. Social media says this is what success looks like. This is what business success looks like. This is if you're a CEO, this is success. This is how much money you should make. If you're a parent, this is the kind of parent you need to be. Oh, you work out, this is the kind of body you need to have. You need to eat this kind of thing, work out this way. Every field, doesn't matter what it is, there is a very strong expectation on social media of how you should be. If we feel shame because we're not behaving in the way that we think we should be, shame is going to be so prevalent. And it's everywhere, especially when it comes to what it means to be successful. What it means, especially for men, this is what it means to be a successful man. And then for women, this is how you should behave. This is how you should dress. This is how you should look like. All of these things, they compile into this sense of, well, I'm not good enough because I don't make as much as this person, or I don't have the same kind of routine, or I don't do these things. So therefore, why would they want me? I'm not good enough. So it's really, really conducive to low self-esteem. And you can use social media to be motivating, but it can, if you have low self-esteem, already and you're looking at these comparisons, they say that saying comparison is the thief of joy. It really is, because it just makes you feel less than. And shame is related to that sense of self-failing. And if I'm looking around at everybody that I think is better than, and remember, social media is so idolized. You see this like perfect version of a person that they are not that way. Their life isn't that way. But we seem to have this idea that this is how I should be. We just we feel less than in every aspect of our life. So we don't go for these opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose and you like you say, like social media, and particularly like platforms like Instagram, where it is visual, we are always constantly trying to put our best foot forward. And actually, it's quite nice when people are a bit more vulnerable and show some of those difficulties and stuff. You actually can feel seen sometimes, where a lot of the time you can be scrolling and you don't feel seen. It doesn't feel realistic. We all know from our own lives that life isn't like what we see on Instagram, yet we all perpetually do the same thing.
Yeah, I was just thinking while you were talking there about one of my friends who literally, like the other day, times have been a bit tough for her financially, and her car broke down, and she needed to like get the car fixed or get a new car. And she sent me a voice note and was just like, "Oh, like, I just feel like such a failure. Like, why can't I just do life like everyone else? Everyone else has, you know, if they have a car problem, they just go and get it fixed or they buy a new car. But for me, it's like I don't know how I'm going to do it financially." And blah. And I was like, where are you getting this idea that everyone's just got like tens of thousands of pounds to just throw at a new car? I was like, most people, if they had to buy a new car, they probably would have to take out a loan or a credit card or get it on finance or whatever. But you don't see that because you go on social media and you see people like, oh, I've just bought a new car. And it looks like everyone's living this really successful life, but it's just not, it's not real. It's not, it's
Yeah.
a fallacy, really.
Yeah, I remember the first year of my PhD. I shared an office with a couple of girls, but there was just two of us there mainly. And I have always been very routine and structured. It's just the way that I am. I've always gotten up early and worked out early. My food's always been very routine. And I've always never had a social life and I just work. That's just always the way that I've been. So when I was in my first year, the other girl in the office, she'd always see me there and see me doing my routine. And, I was just focused and structured. And I looked at her and I was thinking, gosh, I wish I knew what I was doing like she did, because she always seems to know what she's doing. And she said to me one day, can you please teach me how to be like you? And I said, what do you mean? She said, you just seem to know exactly what you're doing all the time. You just have it all together. And I said, really? I have no idea what I'm doing. I thought you knew what you're doing. I am stressed, confused. I'm not sleeping. I said, the only reason that I don't look panicked is because I'm tired. So I don't have the energy to look panicked. I said, but I'm stressed 24/7. She was like, really? Me too. I watch you every day and it's making me feel like, well, I should be that structured. And I said, well, I'm only that structured because if I'm not, I'll fall apart because I have no idea what I'm doing. And we both kind of laughed and it really hit me up. We project our insecurities onto other people. And sometimes what that means is when we feel less than, we try to lower ourselves even more to almost have this confirmation of, yep, I'm not doing enough. Look at everybody else confirming, yep, I'm less than. And if we just stop, sometimes if we ask for help, maybe that person does know what they're doing and can help us. But most of the time, if you say, I need a little bit of help and talk to them, they'll probably say, yeah, when I started out, I felt exactly the same. And I'm still working my way up. Most of the people that I have met in this industry that I used to idolize, you look at people with these hugely successful careers and you go, well, they know exactly what they're doing. Most of them feel exactly the same. They just feel it at a different level. And then they move up a level and they feel it again. They get used to it. They move up a level. They feel it again. They get used to it. That's just a cycle. And we start to realize that. And we realize these feelings are normal. And if people are just more open, then it could lower the shame for most of us. I remember when I did my first TEDx talk, I did it and I talked about my battle with drug addiction early in my life. And a student came up to me after the talk and she said, when I walked on stage, she didn't think I was someone she could relate to. She said, because she saw me and thought I looked structured, I looked professional. She said she saw my background, that I was a professor and a doctor. She was like, that's not someone I can relate to. And she said that she didn't think she could have any of those things. And then I talked about being kicked out of college and my background and the personal battles I'd been through. And she came and she said at the beginning, she thought I couldn't have those things. And at the end of the talk, she said, maybe I could have those things. She said, because I, I am where you were. And maybe one day I could be where you are. And it was that moment that I realized that as much as I love what I do in security, my heart loves what I do in this field of positive psych. And it makes such a difference when you are open and vulnerable because it gives other people the opportunity to do the same.
Oh, it's so true. Like we see people where where they currently are, but we don't see the like years and years of self work and growth and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And like, God, I've never related to anything more. When you're talking about moving on to the next level, and then you've got a whole new comfort zone, and then you move on to the next level. And there are stuff that I do regularly now, like even podcast episodes and stuff like that a few years ago, like you wouldn't have ever caught me doing stuff like that, or I'd have to like hype myself up for like days beforehand, like really scared and nervous. And then you sort of expand your comfort zone like an elastic band. And then now there's stuff that I can't imagine doing that in a few years I probably will be doing, without thinking twice about it. And it's so true, but it is really easy to sort of stagnate and to stay in your comfort zone and not push yourself because of the fears and the shame and all the rest of it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say about like we do get trapped in our ways of thinking, and how do we kind of stop that from occurring all the time? Because it's very easy to do that because, like you say, because it becomes comfortable.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And a lot of the time, we have these self-sabotaging tendencies, and they come from something. We are all products of our childhood as much as we have agency and personality and can change. A lot of us do repeat patterns that we didn't realize that we had. And what I've noticed is most people don't realize when something is abnormal. So like I said, I grew up in a very unstable home. I thought how I grew up was normal. And then I would speak to people and I would say things, and they looked like I had traumatized them from my average conversations with my mom. And I would say about, oh, yeah, my mom will come into my room and scream and degrade me and insult me. She'll leave. And then I'm like, oh, she'll come back and do it again. And my friend was there. And, my mom would storm back out and she's like, oh, no, 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 just wait. She'll come back. And, she'd do that. And for me, it was just normal. That's just my mom. And then when my friend said, this is the most traumatizing thing I've ever seen, I was like, really? Your mom doesn't do this? And that's when it started to click. Ah, this isn't normal. And my sister had a similar thing. We talked about it years later and we were like, so we didn't grow up in a normal way. And then we started to unpack things. And sometimes that's what it takes. So having close friends that you can confide in and talk to about your experiences and how you're feeling is so helpful because they can identify when things aren't normal. Now, I think the most helpful thing is education. And most of us don't have access to the right kind of education. And this is why I moved from writing academic papers to writing these kinds of books, because you can't remedy an emotion unless you understand it. And the shame I had gone through with a lot of things, the shame was because I didn't understand why I was behaving that way. And I was like, well, I'm failing. I can't control my behavior. I can't do these things. And when I learned there were survival mechanisms, and when I learned the underpinning of why I did them, it took away a lot of the shame because it wasn't that I was broken. It was that, well, my body was in a state of survival. So it did these things, and I was trapped in these cycles to try and save me. And then I was able to kind of unravel them. So I think education is so powerful because You can read a book on trauma or emotions and start to realize, oh, I feel that way. Oh, I shouldn't be doing these things. Oh, I should be doing this thing. And if it's explained in a way that is accessible, like I say, my motto is making science accessible. Because if you say to people, hey, go read a textbook on trauma, they're not going to do that. They're not trained to. It's not fun. But reading educational material and seeking out self growth and self help and healing material, and you don't have to have gone through trauma, but just seeking out personal growth material, you might start to realize patterns in your own behavior that you didn't realize were maladaptive. And then having those conversations with loved ones and trusted friends can help you kind of unpick those patterns. Because if you're used to something, why would you think this is bad? Because if it's comfortable for you and you're used to it and you just keep doing it, it's just so familiar that it feels normal. But it is often maladaptive.
Yeah, so I guess the first step is kind of noticing the behavior, right? Because like you say, so many people don't even know they're doing stuff that's kind of...
So you might not notice without asking. So because if I'm just behaving in a way that I think is normal and I've done it for so long, there's not going to be anything necessarily that would make me say, ah, this is normal. So that's why just having initiative, and all of us should be seeking out personal growth anyway, because we all have growing to do. So if you do seek out that material, often you'll come across things that you didn't realize were patterns. And that's why, as well, just having close groups of friends, because when you're talking about your feelings, sometimes things crop up. Like I said, I was just having a conversation with my friend, and they were like, oh, that's not normal. And you're like, really? And then you can kind of work backwards and start to have those realizations. So there's a lot more, like journaling is really important, because sometimes your thoughts are so much that you don't know what you're thinking. Especially at night, it can keep you up. So if you just have a journal and just write down your thoughts, you're not trying to unpack and assess anything, just get them out. Often when you do that, you have realizations as it's all flowing through, and you start to kind of notice little things and notice patterns. And having just those three things can be such a huge, huge help.
What is that? Like, I was having this conversation with my friend the other day because she was saying, like, oh, I was really upset about or annoyed about something, and I started journaling, and then something else started to come out that I didn't even realize. And I was saying, like, I get that all the time. And there must be something about putting pen to paper, like you go into a different state of mind or something. And it's just such a game changer. But I was wondering if there's a reason for that. Like, scientifically, why is that?
Yes. So, and it's not just pen to paper. It has the exact same effect if you put pen to paper, do a note on your phone, type on your laptop, even if you have a fake pen and you write it out, the exact same psychological release. And it's because you make what is untangible tangible. So you can't deal with everything when it's bouncing around. And when you're writing it down, your brain is saying, let me put it into words. Then you can do this through songs. You can do this through music. That's why it's so therapeutic, because these thoughts are currently untangible things. And getting them out in some way, your brain goes through this process of trying to make sense of it. You're not trying to figure out behind it necessarily, but it's putting it into words, and just that act makes it tangible. And again, if you have so many thoughts, how can you pay attention to one? Because there's so many all going on. So if I'm writing, I'm letting it come out individually. And as it's coming out, you start then to notice that patterns, because you're not having every thought all at once. In order to write it, it's flowing through. So it is so helpful. And I think if you're just starting to move into this self growth space and you're trying to be more mindful, simply adding journaling before bed or in the morning is such a great place to start, because you might not even know what you need to work on. But writing it down, you do start to realize, oh, okay, well, I'm struggling with this thing.
Yeah. Okay. And then I suppose in careers, for example, if for example, you have this vision of where you want to be and you're not getting there and you can't work out why, and you keep sort of self-sabotaging, or even in relationships, or other aspects of life, like money, for example, can self-sabotage be so subconscious that you don't even realize you're self-sabotaging? Like with money, if there's something going on there with money, you're spending lots of money, or you're subconsciously kind of putting yourself in positions where there's going to be lots of bills coming in, or whatever it might be. Can it be that subconscious? Because obviously I think with stuff like procrastination, it's very obvious that that's what we're doing if we're sort of like playing Candy Crush instead of doing the work. But sometimes with money, for example, it can be so deep that it doesn't even feel like it's your fault.
Yes. And that's because when it comes to emotions, we have three ways we can deal with them. We can escape them. So here's the emotion. I'm going to do everything I can do to get away from it. And we can self-sabotage in that way. There's problems with money, so I keep spending because it's making me feel good. I'm running away from that feeling because I don't wanna look behind it. I don't wanna face the truth, so I just keep escaping it, and that is a really common way that we deal with our emotions. Now, the other one is, we suppress them. So as it's coming in, I'm not necessarily escaping, but I'm making it go away. And I distract myself so much. And every time it comes up, I go, no, nope. It's saying, hey, I'm sad. Nope. Hey, I'm really scared. No, I'm not. Everything's fine. And you can get to this numbing state. And what happens is then your brain is trying to send you those signals, hey, feel me, feel me. And you go, nope. Hey, feel me. Nope. What happens is your brain can go into a shutdown mode where it shuts down those emotional centers. So you don't feel that pain anymore. You also don't feel anything else. That's why when we continue to suppress our emotions, we start to feel really numb. We get this state of feeling really empty. You stop really caring about anything. And then when you have these things that really need your attention, you're kind of, I don't care. We have the head in the sand, and often that's because we're just very muted and we need the negative emotions and the positive. They motivate us, they tell us what to do. But if I'm numb, I don't care. I'll just keep destroying my life because I don't really feel it. And that's what happens when we suppress. And then the final thing we can do is heal it. And heal it means feel it. And that's the hardest one to do. So most of us go to escape or suppress. And say, when we talk about, I'm going to spend, I'm going to spend, I'm going to spend, those frantic type behaviors, they're escape behaviors. Because if I stop and I look at, okay, look at the situation I'm actually in, let me really look at the consequences of my actions, I'm going to panic. I'm going to be faced with the reality of what that means for my life. Or I could just go shopping and keep doing these things because then I get to escape them. And we do this a lot. And often we self sabotage. And this is why it's so important to self reflect because we self sabotage things that often we think we want, but we don't. We go, well, I want this thing. So why am I keep doing things that won't allow me to get it? And often you don't actually want this thing. You think that you should. We get this, I hear it so much with students of they have this career goal and they can't seem to study. They can't get themselves to study. They keep procrastinating. They go, yeah, but I really, really want this. It's all I want. Is it what you want? Or is it what you think you should go for? Or is it what your parents want you to do? Is it because you think that if you do this, you can have a successful career? And when you unpack it, a lot of the time, what I have found with my students is they don't really want that thing. And that's why they're self sabotaging because they have a should. I should do this. We might have this in our careers as adults. Well, I should want this opportunity. Had a girl in our company who she doesn't want to be a speaker, but she felt like she should. So she wasn't writing speeches and she wasn't practicing and she didn't have the motivation. And when I sat with her and I'm like, what do you want? Scrap what you think you should. What do you really want? And she said, I don't want to be a speaker. And it had been so long of trying to motivate action to help her do these things. And I'm like, right, so don't then. Figure out what it is that you do want because you're going to be much more motivated that way. And again, it's just that social media and not just social media, but A lot of us have these conversations with our friends about success and what we should and should and should. And it just constantly makes us feel like we're not good enough. And a lot of the time, that's where self sabotage comes from.
I bet there are so many people listening who can relate to that,
Mm.
especially the job one, because we've probably all been there where we've been like on track. And you probably get it a lot with people that have these high flying career ambitions to be like doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. And they're like intense jobs. Like if your heart's not in it, I became a teacher, went to university for 3 years, and very quickly was like, this is not for me. Luckily, I'm in tune enough with myself that it was like, I don't want to do this. So I just stopped. But like, it can be really paralyzing, I think. And then in terms of relationships as well, thank you for explaining the three emotional kind of paths that we take when we're confronted with stuff like that. And you see it a lot in romantic relationships and friendships, specifically with kind of, we refer to it sometimes as like avoidant attachment style and stuff like that. When you either don't want to be with someone and you're not really confronting that, you kind of want to break it off, but you also know what that represents as a whole picture, or you do, some people do really want to be with someone, but then they're scared that they can't give that person what they want, or they're not going to be good enough, they're not going to live up to the expectation. And you see this sort of self-sabotaging behavior with people just burying their head in the sand, terrible communication, stuff like that. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, and it's not so much fear of failure per se, fear of abandonment is so common. And what you see is a lot of the time we're so scared that people will leave. So we open the door and go, okay, if you want to leave, you can leave. And that is quite a healthy thing to do. You open the door, you say, this is the path. If you want to leave, you can leave. But it's healthy to end it there. Their choice is, "No, I wanna stay." Often what we do is then we kick them out the door, and we do things and go, "I knew you would leave." And we're forcing them out, and they're going, "I don't wanna go, I don't wanna go." And you go, "Yes, you do. I know you wanna go." We force them out as soon as they get out the door and go, "Fine, you've kicked me out, I'll leave." We use it as confirmation of, "Yeah, I knew that they would do this. I knew they would abandon me." And we're often so scared to be hurt that we sabotage and create our own pain. I remember I had this toxic idea of, again, what empowerment means. And I had this hyper independence because I had brought myself up. If I want to be this strong, independent woman, it means I have to only rely on myself. And we have these toxic notions. So I had this sense that, well, if I let anyone in or I let anybody do anything for me, I'm failing as an independent woman. So you have these kind people come into your life and try and offer you help and love and support. And you go, no, I don't need it. I don't need it in that form. And you self sabotage because you do want it. We all want to belong. It is deeply human. Anyone that says I don't need or want anyone in my life is a liar. And what they're meaning is I'm denying my true human experience. We all desire to belong. But because of those traumas or that attachment style, we self sabotage. They can come in those different forms. You kick people out or you don't let people in because you go, I know who you are, but you're not giving them an opportunity to show you who they are.
God, so true. I can think of multiple people and multiple times I've been like that myself as well with people and friendships. And it's so fascinating. I feel like I could talk about this all day. But just to move forward slightly, what sort of steps can you take once you've kind of recognized, that you're self-sabotaging and you've sort of educated yourself in some way about what that is and where that comes from? And it is really important, as you said, to kind of look at your past and your childhood and work out, it's because of this, or like, oh, I don't trust people because of this. Then what can we do? Like, is it as simple as just sort of like, right, you have to just force yourself to do it anyway and just feel the fear and do it anyway? Or are there steps you can take to kind of push yourself out of that comfort zone?
Well, I always say fake it till you make it, but I flip it. So, not fake it entirely, feel the emotion, fake the behavior. Because we know that things like going to the gym, that increases serotonin. We know that when we exercise, our muscles actually excrete serotonin. So it's better for well-being. We know that getting up in the morning early with the sunrise, going to bed with the sun down, it helps regulate our cortisol levels. So that will contribute to well-being. Having a good diet will affect our microbiome, which most of our serotonin is actually created in the gut rather than the brain. So healthy diet, all of these things that we go, oh yeah, drinking water, eating well, that we know, but we don't do, they actively contribute to a huge extent of our mental well-being and physical well-being. So doing those things when you don't want to, I did not want to go to the gym this morning. I really did not. And I was messaging my friends saying, I'm tired, I want to be in bed, but here I am. And afterwards, you feel so good. And I was doing it because in my head, I go, I need this serotonin today. I need these endorphins today. And then you spend time with friends. Those things increase oxytocin, increase serotonin. And things like gratitude and affirmations, when you do them regularly, they activate reward pathways. So you get natural dopamine. So you don't seek it so much from other sources. So those basic things we should all be doing. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect and do them every single day and be completely routine, but just generally having a healthy routine will make you feel so much better. And then we need to self reflect. And this is a really hard thing to do, to sit down and ask ourselves, why did I do this? Because then really bad emotions start to come up and it's really easy to stop digging, but really sitting with that and go, no, why deeper? Why did I do this? Why am I feeling this way? And really start to unpack and realize unpacking those things take a lot of time. And most of us don't really have very good emotional regulation strategies. And we need to recognize that emotions feel enduring. So when you feel a negative emotion, it's designed to make you feel that it's going to last forever. When you understand that emotions come in waves and you recognize, okay, this emotion is sending me a signal, but they lied to me. They do lie to us. We take them so personally. We feel fear and we think, well, I'm weak. We feel anger and go, well, I'm an angry person, rather than this anger is telling me something. So separating ourselves from our emotions and recognizing their signals, they're not necessarily indicative of my character, and sitting with those things and allowing ourselves to be uncomfortable. But I really do think that seeking out education is such a great place to start, because we can't all afford a therapist. And sometimes having therapy for some people puts them in a victim mentality of I'm someone that is broken. I'm someone that needs saving. And that isn't for everyone. For some people, it's an amazing thing for them, but everybody is different. So seeking out reliable sources of information, like going to educational blogs. And then if you do like research, reading research papers and reading books by scientists, reading books by reliable authors, fact checking material, and just seeking it out for yourself like that allows you then the strategies to then regulate yourself. Because I don't like the books that say when you feel this way, do A, B, C, D. When you're in this situation, do A, B, C, D. I like the books, like I try to write mine of, I give you a toolkit. So I don't say in this situation, do these things. I try and teach how you can regulate yourself. So you go into that situation and you can decide on how you feel and the steps you want to take. Because it's all about understanding how to regulate your own emotions so you can translate that into your personal relationships, your professional relationships, and anything else.
That's amazing advice. And people should be seeking out your book. So that's probably a good segue into telling us where people can find your book and where they can find you on social media.
Yep. So drabbieofficial.com. And it's Dr. like DRABBIE official, and abbieMaroño.com. And also Dr. Abbie Official on Instagram and Dr. Abbie Maroño on LinkedIn.
And where can people find your books?
Oh, yes. My book can be found in any major bookstore, but of course, Amazon. So it's called Work in Progress, and it can be found on Amazon.
Work in progress, but we can all probably say that about ourselves. Actually, we're all works in progress. But it's a brilliant book, and it's been fantastic talking to you today. We really appreciate your time. So much great advice. I'm sure we could have talked all day about this stuff.
Yeah.
But I know there's going to be lots of people listening that are going to take so much from it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Abbie.
Thank you so much for having me.